So I was assigned a very difficult task to present Father Andrew Louth without spending in doing so the rest of our evening tonight. A couple of days ago, I was watching the ceremony of awarding Nobel Prizes in Stockholm and felt very sorry about those who had to present the achievements of the winners in a few words. I feel I have a similar task here. Let me begin with my personal story. In 2000, I came to Durham to study theology under Professor Louth's supervision. After years I spent in theological studies in Ukraine and in Greece. I should say that those years that I stayed in Durham with Father Andrew completely changed the way I looked at theology and its sources. The most important thing I learned from Father Andrew is to avoid extrapolating my own ideas on the fathers and mothers of the Church, and instead to be attentive to what they wanted to say, not what I wanted to say to them, and to ascribe to them what I wanted to believe. Even if this, what they wanted to say to me was sometimes contrary to what I believed to be orthodox. In Durham, I had to leave behind almost everything I had studied in Kiev and Athens, probably except one thing, paleography. My lessons in medieval Greek manuscripts helped me to decipher Father Andrew's notes on the pieces I presented to him. In Durham, Father Andrew spent most of his teaching and supervising career as professor of patristics and Byzantine studies from 1996 through 2010. Before that, he taught in Oxford University, mostly patristics, from 1970 to 1985, and in Goldsmiths College in the University of London, where he taught mostly Byzantine and early medieval history from 1985 to 1995. Before that, he studied at the universities of Cambridge and Edinburgh. It is remarkable that he first studied mathematics and then theology, which proves a thesis that best scholars in metaphysics often come after they studied physics. Last June, we were together at a conference on the Greek Isle of Cyril, and Father Andrew told me some stories about a remarkable group of young people who studied in Cambridge in approximately the same time in the late 60s. Well, that group included people like Ron Williams, for instance, and others. I hope one day a book will be published about that group of theologians who, to me, look pretty much like the Inklings in Oxford. I could describe Father Andrew's research interests in his own words. They, I quote him, lie mostly in the history of theology, in the Greek tradition, mostly in periods later than what is generally studied in English universities, that is, after the 5th century, in the period of the Byzantine Empire, but also later, especially the modern period, 19th century and later, where, he says, my research, I quote him, research interests also include Russian and Romanian Orthodox theology. This interest also embraces the philosophical traditions often called Neoplatonic, of the Byzantine period. My interest in theology of these periods is not purely historical, since I regard dialogue with the theological writers of the past as a resource for theological reflection today. Within this tradition, what one might broadly think of as Eastern Orthodox, theology is not separated from prayer and spirituality. The God whom we seek to understand is the God to whom we pray. End of quote. Probably this is not coincidental that we chose for this conference the topic on contemplation, spirituality. For most of us here, Father Andrew is known as a Maximian scholar, of course. I would not probably exaggerate if I say that Father Andrew created a school of studies on Maximus the Confessor, and from a relatively marginally studied theologian, he made him the Augustine for the Eastern Christianity. I remember the presentation of the Oxford Handbook of Maximus the Confessor during the Patristic Conference in 2015. Most contributors to the volume gathered for the presentation were either disciples or scholars inspired by the work of Father Andrew. In a sense, I believe that presentation was a celebration of Father Andrew's input to the global Maximian scholarship. Of course, the interests of Father Andrew go beyond Maximus, as he himself just indicated in the description of his fields. He published a significant number of books on different subjects. Let me list most important of them here, and some of them are presented there at the exhibition at the back of this room. One of the earliest and probably the most classical study by Father Andrew is The Origins of the Christian Mystical Tradition, from Plato to to Dennis, by Clarendon Press, 1983. The second one is Discerning the Mystery, an essay on the nature of theology, by Oxford University Press in 1989. Then Dennis the Areopagite by Continuum in 1989. The Wilderness of God by Darton, Longman and Todd in 1991. Maximus the Confessor by Routledge in 1996. Then The Wisdom of the Greek Fathers, Evagrius of Pontus and Maximus the Confessor by an Oxford-based publisher, Lyon, in 1997. St. John Damascene, Tradition and Originality in Byzantine Theology. I remember that book very well because it came up when I was studying with Father Andrew. It was published in 2002 by the OUP. Then Greek East and Latin West, the Church from AD 681 to 1071 by St. Vladimir Seminary Press. Then the Introducing Eastern Orthodox Theology by the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge in 2013. And the last book, the really big thing that came up in 2015, Modern Orthodox Thinkers from Philokalia to the Present, published in England, at least in the UK, by the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. Father Andrew is also an editor of the journal Sobornost and editor, together with Gillian Clark, of the series Oxford Early Christian Studies. In conclusion, I would mention that after Father Andrew retired from Durham, he continued as an honorary fellow at the Free University of Amsterdam. We have here with us colleagues from the Amsterdam Center for Orthodox Theology who invited Father Andrew to work in Amsterdam. Last but not least, in 2010, Father Andrew was elected a Fellow of the British Academy. So, let us welcome Father Andrew.